All right. What's up, guys? So, in today's stream, we're going to be talking a little bit about what we ended off on last stream with hooking up Firebase authentication, a couple more things I want to add, and then we're going to jump into setting up Chakra UI, doing absolute imports, and also saving off some user information with Firestore to the database. So the first thing I want to talk about is Firebase authentication and two pieces that I didn't cover last time that I want to talk about. The first one is authorized domains. So when you're doing authentication, Firebase by default blocks all domains except that what's listed here under authorized domains. So obviously localhost was allowed, and then our production application we want to allow. But one thing that you need to note is by adding the now.sh domain, it makes it so that when you do your preview deploys, you can also log in on those. So that was something I found as I went through the authentication flow there. So that's one thing to note. Another thing you're going to want to note is environment variables. And that was something that we had set them up locally through our env.local file, but as you make your way through those environments from the deploy preview to production, you want to make sure that you have those set for all environments. So if I jump over to the fast feedback dashboard in Vercel, and I go to settings, in general, there is environment variables, and we have our development keys locally. If you wanted to, you could do them through the UI as well, but I prefer just to do it on my machine to get it up a little bit faster. But then I've also populated the same values for preview and production. Now, why this is important is because eventually, once I get further down the road, we're going to have a completely separate Firebase instance for the preview and local environment, which is probably what we'll be using right now, and have a brand new instance for production so that I can freely delete users and freely delete information as I'm developing and testing and not have it affect my production database. So those are two things that I wanted to just touch on from last time that you'll need to know as you deploy Firebase. The next thing I want to talk about is a couple things to know before starting. And these are some thoughts that I had wrote down as I started to write some of these documentation about building a SaaS product and some of the things that you need to know. And really, three things I want to talk about: the name, the design of your website, and the domain name that you choose. So I'm not going to get too far into the weeds on any of these, but I think it's helpful to provide kind of a high-level overview so that you understand what it takes to go from zero to a SaaS business. So your name should be easy to remember, ideally the name of your business, whether that's a new unique word like Vercel or by describing the product that you offer like fast feedback. It's very obvious what I'm providing to the customer. They're able to get faster feedback. So an exercise that I do and what I did for picking out fast feedback was I wrote down 5 to 10 words that were related to the product that I was trying to build. And then, or even the outcomes that they're trying to get. Like they want to get feedback faster. And then you can use tools like domain name generators, which I'll link to, or even a thesaurus. So initially I wanted to do instant feedback. And after looking at other words, I ended up just putting instant in the thesaurus. And then I was like, oh yeah, fast feedback. That makes a lot more sense. So a couple little tips there for how you can pick the name of your business. For your design, really what it comes down to me is if you're not a designer, that's okay, but consider hiring a designer because the design of your application is actually very important. So whether you hire a designer, use a design framework or a template or some kind of visual editor, it's really important to not skimp on this. And I want to just quickly share the design process that I personally took because I think this would be helpful. So I like to use Excalidraw for low fidelity mockups. It makes it really easy just to not focus on the polish, but instead just get something, anything, and not have a lot of cost with having to change things around. So I do kind of my wireframes through Excalidraw, Then if I'm happy with kind of the flow or just a general layout of the information, then I translate that over to Figma, where I get more high fidelity. I try to start putting the right colors and the right pixels in place. When I'm finally satisfied with that, I might even go do some kind of user testing, show some friends, see what that flow looks like. And then one tool that I've really been liking is called Chakra. So we're going to be talking about setting up Chakra UI in this video, and Chakra is a visual editor that allows you to turn your mockups into real React code. A little bit further, we'll probably be building out UI components, and we can go through here and I can take you through what this looks like to actually build components inside of here. The final piece is your domain name, and a lot of the time people buy the domain names first, honestly. That's one of the big challenges. You want to have a really catchy domain name. So you want to make sure you check social media too, so you can try to find the domain names that you want and that they're not taken for Twitter, Facebook, etc. And I mentioned this before in the last video, but Vercel makes it really easy to buy domain names and then get them associated to your account, get the SSL set up, configure the DNS, and just already have your site live in production. So they're a great choice. I know there's a few others. Really doesn't matter how you get that domain name, but since in this course we're going to be deploying with Vercel, you'll have to get it integrated with Vercel, and they allow you to import domains in from anywhere else. So that won't be a problem. The next thing I want to talk about is data fetching. So it's important that we kind of go over some of these fundamentals about Next.js, because it'll help you understand why I've made some of the architecture decisions that I have with this application. So this course is built on the Jamstack, which stands for JavaScript APIs and Markup. And really that foundation was built on static site generators, right? I want to make it as easy as possible to build a static site that's very performant. And almost all of these frameworks had a single way to fetch data, right? It was at build time. Give me some Markdown, give me some APIs, and then serve out some static pages to users. But in reality, not all these pages are equal. And as we scale our applications, we realize that these frameworks really needed to evolve. And I think that's where Next.js comes in. And these Jamstack frameworks of the future allow you to change your data fetching strategy on a per page basis. It's really a hybrid approach. So your landing page is going to be generated at build time, but your dashboard might be client-side rendered. And this flexibility allows you to stay within the bounds of a framework without having to switch. So, for example, a site might have static generation for marketing pages, blog posts, documentation, but then maybe they do client-side rendering to stir up a static shell and a loading state before you fetch more information for like a user dashboard, which is what we'll be doing with fast feedback. And that's a great thing about Next.js. So static generation, let's dive into that first. Static sites are really the base of Jamstack, and generating that HTML at the build time and then reusing it on each request. So static sites are great because they're cheaper. You don't have to make a request to the server every time. It's faster because you can put it on a global CDN where it's going to be closer to your users. And then overall, it's just easier. With static sites, most of the time you have much easier deployments and arguably a better developer experience as well. So you build your page, it gets served by a CDN, which makes it really, really fast. With Next.js, if you're not doing any data fetching, let's say you're just exporting a vanilla React component that's displaying some text on the screen, Next.js is going to pre-render this page by default so that it gets statically generated. So for example, if we have a page about products, that's going to get converted to products.html at build time, and you're going to be able to hit this page and it's going to be statically generated. Now you can also use static generation if you want to use external data sources. So your data gets transformed into HTML then using getStaticProps and getStaticPass. So I'm going to build on like this e-commerce example to hopefully paint the picture here. Let's take products a step further, right? We want to fetch our products from a CMS, but we still want to have static pages, right? So I'm building this e-commerce site. If I use get static props, I'm able to fetch these products and then pass a prop of products into my React component and then render these out statically. The cool thing about get static props is that you can go directly to your database with a tool like Prisma if you want to, because it's not included in that client-side JavaScript bundle that you're shipping to your users. If this is all server-side code, you can do anything that you would do in Node here. And what happens really here is it pre-renders HTML, it serves up a JSON file containing those products that you fetched, and then you're able to access that on the client side. So the companion to get static props is get static pass. I want to generate X number of pages based on some data. So for all of these products, each one needs to have a product page. So if we use get static pass, we can fetch all those products. We can iterate over each one using their ID, for example, as the parameter in your URL, and then use that to dynamically generate all of these pages at build time. Now, one specific key here that you need to know is the fallback. So if fallback is false and you try to go to a route that doesn't exist, then you're going to serve up a 404 route. And I can talk about what happens if you want to handle fallback pages later. But the cool thing here is using Next.js dynamic routes, it just makes it really easy to do this. And again, the dynamic routes is when you use the bracket syntax. The next really cool thing, and this is something that we're going to be doing for fast feedback, is combining like the best of both worlds, right? I want to have static pages, but I have really, really complex data requirements. So how can I get there? And incremental static regeneration, which is currently in beta, but will soon be ready for everyone to use, allows you to scale, 10 e-commerce products to 10,000 or 100,000 or as many as you want. And basically what happens is a static page with all of your products is served up at build time, right? You generate all of those pages. But when a request comes in, it's still going to serve that static page, but then in the background, the page, you make a request to go get those new products, and let's say you define 1 minute, that page gets generated and then it gets replaced in the CDN with the most updated content. So you're really getting the best of both worlds here, right? It's always online because it's a static page, and if that fails in the background, it's not going to update that static page. So always fast, always online, and globally distributed. And this is based on stale while revalidate, if you've seen that before, that it allows you to do that updating in the background to ensure that you're not degrading the performance of potentially thousands of people on your site that you want to be blazing fast. So this is supported on Vercel's Edge network out of the box, and they have a really cool example that does this with Twitter, that there's 500 million new tweets a day, so it just shows the scale of kind of how you can push this out to be further. The next one is doing client-side fetching. So this is what I touched on with like a user dashboard, where you might want to serve up a static route or a static loading shell, and then you might have complex data requirements. Okay, let's serve up a bunch of data after we serve that loading shell. And this is actually what Vercel does on their dashboards that we just were looking at. So you pre-render this page, you show a loading state, and then you fetch and display that data on the client side. Now, one library that makes this really easy to do is called SWR, which is also made by Vercel. And it gives you a really nice API to fetch information from, whether it's an external API or your API routes. And then if you've used GraphQL before, it kind of has that same like data air syntax. Another really great library is React Query for doing something very similar to this. So I'd check that out as well if you would like to use that too. And then kind of the final piece to the puzzle, right, is APIs. You have the way to fetch information, but most of the time you're also having to integrate with some kind of APIs. So for example, going on with this e-commerce theme of products, maybe you need to modify something with the cart or pull products from the cart. So we could make a new route at pages API cart, which is going to create this serverless function that allows us to mutate some data source, whether that's in a database somewhere or whatever. And we can pass in a product ID, which you see here with request.query product ID, and then maybe make some requests behind the scenes to update information about our cart. Now this API, like I said, gets served with a serverless function, and the nice thing here is then we can access these external APIs securely, right? We don't want to expose, this authorization token or API key. We don't want to do that on the client side, which allows these API routes allow us to use environment variables to do that, which is overall much more secure. The final piece that a lot of people know Next.js for is server-side rendering, right? And what we're seeing is as these Jamstack frameworks grow, there's less of a need where you'll truly need to do server-side rendering. A lot of people think, oh, server-side rendering, that's great for SEO, which it is, but static sites have that same SEO benefit. So you have to understand that trade-off. Is my data so complex that it needs to be computed on every request? If so, then it's probably worth taking that little bit of a performance hit to have that availability of having that data change on every request. So it's not really going away, but it is evolving to be better. With static generation, it's not really a static site because you're still having to go talk to your server, but instead it's happening in the background for better availability. So hopefully that gives you a really good overview of just all of the different ways you can fetch data with Next.js and just the Jamstack in general. Feel free to let me know if you want more elaboration on any of those things, but I think sticking with one example kind of helps paint the picture of, okay, how would this evolve my application as it grows and grows. Let's see, talked about data fetching. Okay, let's get into saving some user data. I've made a couple changes here locally from the last time we looked at the code just to clean up some things. So I want to make sure we talk through those first. It's not going to let me resize. That's all right. So I renamed this to auth provider just because I thought it sounded a little bit better. This is in our auth hook that we've created. And then I realized I was doing basically the same thing in 3 places, which is modifying state and then returning that user. So once they signed in, I would set the user in state and then return it. When they signed out, I would set the user to false. When they would unsubscribe, I would do the exact same thing. So I extracted this out into a handle user function where if I'm getting a user, I'm going to take that and I'm going to format it and set that in state. Otherwise, set it to false because the user's logging out. Now, the reason I added this was because what we get back from Firebase auth is a lot of data, right? And we don't need to worry about all of that. So really, at least for right now, I think all we'll probably need is the unique ID, the email, the name, and the provider that they logged in with. Because I think we're going to show like a logo of either GitHub or Twitter or Facebook for what the user left a comment with. We might need to add photo URL in here too, but we'll save that for later. And here I just renamed it to auth provider and changed this. Yeah, I changed it away from a function. And then inside of here, I got rid of some optional chaining that I didn't necessarily need. So you can see now. And then I changed the title away from fast feedback, or from create React app, create next app to fast feedback. So just a couple minor changes here, but I wanted to make sure I ran through those first. So I'm gonna open up auth, and what I want to talk about is saving users to the database. So we have shown how to sign in with users, right? Looks like a couple people have already signed in and tried out the site. But we also want to then save this to the database. And the reason we want to do that is because we can only save like the information that Firebase auth provides. We can't do anything extra. And we're going to need to know more information about users, like what pricing plan they're on and what their photo URL is and etc. So to extend the capability of Firebase, we need to use Firestore. So I'm going to go ahead and create a database right now, and I'm going to start in test mode so that I can query this and add information. And we'll just do US Central. So this will allow me to get up and going quickly, but then we'll need to swing back and update the authentication or authorization rules so that only specific people can access this. For example, my user should only be able to access my data. So we'll provision our database here. Okay, it looks like that just finished. Cool. So inside of this auth function, when we actually create the user and we set it in the state, we also want to save it off in the database. So to separate my concerns here, I'm going to make a new file inside of here, and we could just call it database or Firestore, either one. We've already set up Firebase, so let's import Firebase. And now we have Firebase set up, but we need to access Firestore. So we'll do firebase.firestore. And we want to make a new function to create a user. So let's export a function create user, and this is going to take in, we could just say it's going to take in an ID and then the data about the user. And we want to call Firestore. We want to say the collection name, which is similar to like a table in a typical relational database, is going to be users. The document is going to be the ID of the user that we have. And then we want to set the information on there. So I'm going to combine this ID with the rest of the data. But then there's a special field here that we can use, which is merge to true, to make sure that we're keeping that ID unique. Let's see, I think that's complaining because this needs to be an object. So yeah, Firestore users for the document at that ID, set it equal to the data that we pass in. Okay, so we have that. Now what we want to do is go back over to here, and when we get our formatted user, let's go ahead and create a user and pass it in the user's ID as well as kind of the rest of the data. Yeah, let's do that. We need to import this. Okay. I already have this running locally. Firestore.collection is not an object. I wonder what that's talking about. Did I already export Firestore? No. What could it be? What could it be? Do I need to restart my server? Oh, that would be it. I have my documentation running. I'm guessing that's screwing something up. Don't want to have two applications running on the same port. Let's try this again. Let me know if the music's too loud. It's kind of hard to tell, to be honest. Okay, we got a error. Still saying that that is undefined. Still have my local file. Let me try commenting this out and make sure it's working before. Compiled successfully. Okay, so it's still working there. Am I missing an import? Export Firebase. It's so strange because it's even giving me the autocomplete. Just looking at my notes and it really seems right. Let's try re-adding that. Firestore collection document is not a function. Oh, but it is. Doc, not document. It's always something, right? It's always those small typos. Those are always the one that get you. Pro tip, doc, not document. I'm gonna need to go back in here. Let me just duplicate this. And I want to have a separate tab for authentication. So you can see my user is here. What happened is the application reloaded. We went inside of here, and if this user does not exist, we're going to go ahead and create a user for this ID. And if we go back to the database, we see that users at ID was created with the fields that we provided. So if I were to change this to be a different string, we could make new tables, a different document ID. You can use that ID or you can hard code it to something else as long as that's unique. And then you can pass in whatever data you want. So one other thing I want to find is I want to also save off the photo URL. And I believe I'll have to figure out what this is, but I think it is just photo URL, but I could be wrong. So let's find out. Not the formatted one. So this is the raw dump of everything that we get back. Yep, okay, photo URL in all caps. So let's also include this. I don't really like the all caps, so let's do we don't need that anymore because we know what we're working with. Cool. I don't even have to refresh. Firebase is smart enough to figure that out. So you see now we're saving off the photo URL as well too here. Eventually we're going to use that to display the avatar on the dashboard. Okay, so where are we at? We are able to set up our Firestore, save information off. The next thing that I want to talk about in this video is setting the groundwork for doing the UI and styling work that we're going to do. And the library that I've chosen to use is called Chakra UI. So Chakra UI is based on top of styled system, which I touched a little bit on in the last video, but I've been really happy with Chakra UI. I've used it on a bunch of projects now, and it's got a really good breadth of components, great APIs, and it makes it really easy to take an idea and kind of see that through. And I love using style props. I think that was one thing the style system really got me kind of addicted to. It makes it so much faster to build these things out, and it allows you to use tools like OpenChakra, which allow you to just kind of get going a lot faster. So we're going to set up Chakra UI. Let's kill our server and install these dependencies. It comes with a default theme, but we can kind of override that and do whatever we want, and that's based on the system UI theme spec, again, that I had already talked about. So on my personal site, which I have somewhere, yeah, this is on my personal site. This is an example of just what a larger theme might look like. I'm overriding the default theme. I'm providing my own font. I'm providing what font weights I want, and then you can also pass in the SVG paths to define your own icons. So I pulled in like Twitter, GitHub, LinkedIn, and a couple others, and that just makes it really easy because then you can do this icon name of Twitter syntax, and just simplifies that a lot. So I'm actually going to just take this and delete some things. Let's make a new folder. We'll do styles. We'll make a theme. I'm not going to worry about any icons for now, but I will show how we can add some custom fonts, because I'm guessing I'm probably going to want to do custom fonts for this. So override the fonts, and then we're going to use enter, and then have just kind of a fallback default font stack. And then potentially these are the weights I'm going to use. This is what I use for my personal site. Maybe we'll do, yeah, we'll just stick with that for now. So it looks like all of our packages have finished installing. The next step is wrapping your application with a theme provider to make those values available, and we're going to do that at the app level. So we already have an auth provider. Let's throw on a theme provider here as well. Got that auto import. And then we want to pass in that new theme that we just created. So let's see. Yeah, that looks good. Okay, so now the only missing piece here is that I defined enter, but I'm not actually loading this font anywhere. So we're going to need to do two things here. One, we're going to need to get that font. And then two, we are going to need to override the document. So for enter, we want 400. Well, yeah, this is what we're going to need. But I want multiple styles. 400, 600, 700. Okay? Now, this custom document is what you're going to use that allow you to modify the markup that comes from the server. So what we want to do is take this and go into pages, make a new document.js, and we don't need to do anything with get initial props, but we want to make sure we include all of this stuff. So let's now, inside of our head, let's include this script for loading the font. So it's got the different weights, and it's going to swap that out. It's going to show the system font stack first, and then once that finishes loading, we'll show this. Oh, I missed a self-closing tag there. That should now auto-format. Okay, that looks good. See if we can get this running locally. Shouldn't need this anymore. Shouldn't need this anymore. Or this. Are we going? No. Firestore is not a function again. Ooh, something I just thought of too. In the index, I know that in the default stuff that we were getting from Create Next app, there's a lot of styling in here that we don't need. And then there's also this global styling at the bottom that's doing the system font stack. So we should honestly probably just rip all of this out because we're going to be doing our own styling anyway. Yeah, and then we don't need that anymore. And we don't need to define the head here either because we just did that in document. So let's pull that out as well. And there's no class names here either. We'll just clean this up a little bit. That simplifies things a lot in here. And then if we go back to document, nice. Yeah, at some point later on, I'm going to talk about how we want to do all the different favicons, because surprisingly getting favicons right is very difficult to support for all the different browsers and devices that you want to do. So there's some pretty helpful favicon generators that we can use that will take care of that for us. Okay. So it looks like we're still getting this error about Firestore. It's really strange. I'm just going to quickly review the changes that I have and see if anything sticks out to me. A theme is a theme. We deleted a lot of things here, nothing that sticks out. Custom document. Okay. Custom app with the new provider, yep. Doc, not document. We're calling create user. That looks good. Our new versions of Chakra and Emotion for CSS and JS. All of that seems okay. I feel like there's still something weird going on here. Default.firestore is not a function. To the Google we go. I must have forgotten to import this Firestore library. Let's go to Firebase. Ah. I have a feeling that's it. Let's see where we're at now. That was it, I think. Title should not be used in document.js's head. Good call. We probably want to do that on the app.js side. We'll come back to that. I'll just leave it in here for now. So this looks much worse without styles in here, but we're on the right track. Let's go back to auth and re-add create user now that our Firestore libraries are all included. Okay, and we now should have Chakra set up. One thing we want to do is if we go to our app, let's also include the global styles for CSS reset. Yes, that would be a good idea. Yeah, let's put this here. I like how they named this custom theme too. Probably need to import that. That looks good. Okay. Okay, what are we working with here? So it looks like it's properly loading our fonts. If we look at our head, we're able to see that favicon, the enter font that we loaded, the title, and then here's our CSS and JS. And then yeah, diving into one of these elements, if we go to computed, we should see the font family is being set correctly. So this is a start. Let's start actually making this look a little bit more what it looked like before. So to do that, the first thing we're gonna need is a button, right? We'll probably also need a heading. You can just change this to capital B. For this, we'll just do a heading. And for this, we'll do text. think there's also, yeah, there's also a code you can do for here. Where are you at, auto import? So those all got added to the Chakra import. Ooh, that's not what I want. Personally, I like to group my imports by external packages first and then internal stuff secondary. Okay, that's looking a little bit better. Let's make sure everything's still working still. So sign out, that looks good. Sign in, this should prompt me all the way through the flow. Nice. Our username is still showing up. So Chakra is set up. We are loading a custom font. I just want to quickly show what it looks like to use style props. So I don't think that this heading has the right font weight. Oh no, it's at 700. Cool. For an example, I could just show what if we want to do 600 instead. Because I think in our theme, yeah, we had normal, medium, and bold. So you could either say explicitly 600 like this, see that change, or you can use the more human readable version, which is medium. So by default, these headings are going to be bold. You can do that, or you can go back to normal. And that's going to be the same as the text. We don't want to do that because we want bold, so we can kind of keep that as is. The final thing I want to talk about in the stream today is setting up absolute imports and aliases. And this is an awesome feature from Next.js 9.4. So basically, as these projects start to get bigger, it's not too big right now, so we're only seeing one level, but as we start to build API routes and build more components, it can get out of hand pretty quickly, having a ton of levels deep. So a really, really helpful feature that was added in Next.js 9.4 is absolute imports and aliases. So this works with JavaScript or TypeScript. Basically, you can define this config file, whether a JS config or a TS config, and it will allow you to define what the base of your project is, and then you can use these paths to define, I want to map, this folder to this alias. So we want to, I'd like this convention of the @ and the slash. So let's try to do something like this. Since this is JS, we can do a new file, JS config. And then currently our setup looks like lib styles, and then we're probably going to have components here very shortly too. So let's do components. And then, yeah, lib and styles. I think that's all we need to do. Let's give this a try. I might need to restart. Another way we could test this is working is just try to click into it. So it looks like that worked. I just needed to restart my server. So when I hover over this alias now, it's giving me that autocomplete so that I can jump into it. If I hold Command and click on that, you can use VS Code to jump into this file. So if we wanted to rename some of these places. We could do a find all, and we could do search for ... and kind of see all the places that we were doing this. Right now it's obviously not that crazy because our application is too small, but if you had a larger application, then you can go through here and refactor these a little bit easier. So let's do that, and I'm gonna move this down to here. Yeah, I guess that's the only one. Is there 2 levels deep? Nope. So we're still sitting pretty. That looks good. Throw a refresh on here and make sure things are working. Nice. One other tip I want to talk about while we're setting up the base for the rest of our styling is overriding that CSS reset to provide some other default styles. And if we jump back to my personal site, if we go to my app, I have this defined as the global style. So not only do I have a CSS reset, but I also conditionally change some styles based on the color mode, and then some other really niceties to have. I'm gonna copy this over, and we're not doing dark mode, at least for right now. Maybe I'll do that in the future, but a couple of these are really good to have. Selection, it's just purely visual sugar. We don't need to worry about that, but I do like to set a minimum width so that things scale better when you get down to smaller screen sizes, and you don't have to support 10-year-old phones. And then the smooth scroll behavior is very nice. And then one thing here that's pretty interesting is you'll see this if you look over here in the inspector. This top level div that gets rendered has an ID of Next, and it can sometimes your document won't take the full height of the screen. So setting this to a flex column and putting the min height to 100% of the viewport height will help get around that issue that I feel like more often than not I end up doing this with almost all of my Next apps. So I want to include this. Need to include CSS from emotion as well as that global style. Global CSS, we already have the CSS reset. Yeah, that's looking good to me. Since the CSS reset is defined inside of here, we can replace that with the global style. So we should now be able to see these styles applied to that next element, which we do over here on the left, the display, the flex direction, and the minimum height. So this should give us a pretty good base for starting to do styling, having the absolute imports set up and the aliases so that as our application grows, we can do it in a sane manner. And we now have the base for connecting to Firestore, our database is set up, and we can scale this out as we want to add more queries. So a lot of groundwork in this one, not too much to show for it, but we've kind of laid the plans for more work and more streams in the future. I think that is pretty much everything that we're going to talk about today. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot me a message or send me an email, and I'll be happy to help out. So thanks so much for following along with the stream. If you're watching it live or if you're recording it, I really appreciate it. So thanks.